Ohio takes on Louisiana, 8 p.m. Eastern kickoff this Thursday. The Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns are minus 20, totals 54.5. And if you want to see which one of these free YouTube picks that I'm actually betting on personally, there's only one way to do that, and that's to get a membership on my website at brockpage.com. Now, the Ragin' Cajuns, they have failed to cover the number in their first two ball games this year. Those were failures to cover against Texas and Nicholls State. Louisiana's averaging only 22 points a game, and they're rushing for less than 95 yards per contest. The Ohio Bobcats, on the other side, they're giving up just 147 yards a game passing. Linebacker Bryce Houston's currently leading the program with 20 total tackles from that linebacker position. And when it comes to the total in this one, both offenses have proven to be a bit shaky. Louisiana's also 2-0 to the under thus far in the season. I'm going to lean toward the Ohio Bobcats plus 20 and the under 54.5. Next ball game, UCF Louisville, 7:30 p.m. Eastern kickoff this Friday. UCF's minus 7, total 69.5. The UCF Knights are throwing for 350 a game. Dylan Gabriel's thrown for 6 touchdown passes already, while wide receiver Jalen Robinson, he's averaging over 23 yards per reception. Now, running back Isaiah Bowser, he's gained 231 yards on the ground, along with 5 touchdowns. They're taking on a Louisville program who gave up 43 points to Ole Miss at home. The Cards are also allowing over 6.2 yards per play defensively. Total-wise, not so sure Louisville's going to score enough to help put this one over. I'm going to lean toward the UCF Knights minus 7 and the under 69 and a hook. Next ball game. Not on our big screen, but it is going to be Maryland versus Illinois, 9 p.m. East. Maryland's minus 7, totals 59.5. Now, the Terps are 2-0 in the season with a big victory in their opener over West Virginia. Talia Tungavailoa, he's completing over 76% of his passes, 600 yards already. He's thrown for, actually over 600 yards. The quarterback's also thrown for 6 touchdown passes. As his favorite target's Dante Demas, who's got a dozen grabs for 261 and a pair of scores. And as a matter of fact, Demas is averaging over 21.5 yards per reception. Meanwhile, defensively, the Terps are holding their opponents to just 57 yards rushing a game. Tarheeb still has 10 total tackles and a sack from the secondary. They're taking on an Illinois squad who allows 34 points a game on average through 3 contests. This Illini defense is also allowing over 310 yards passing a game. Now, total-wise, oddly enough, we did see 2 out of Illinois' 3 ball games on the season stay under the line. Meanwhile, on the other side, we know that Maryland has a pretty good defense themselves. Could be Maryland minus 7, under 59.5. Next ball game, another one not on our big screen, but it is going to be Boston College versus Temple. 12 p.m. Eastern kickoff this Saturday. BC's minus 16.5, total 60. But as good as BC's looked, Phil Yurkovich, he's out. He had surgery. And Zay Flowers, he's battling injury as well. BC also let a terrible UMass program score 28 points against them last week. They're taking on a Temple team who put up 45 on Akron. And they rank in the top 10 in the country in offensive time of possession. Wide receiver Randall Jones, 8 catches, 208 yards, couple of scores. He's averaging 26 yards per reception. Meanwhile, defensively, William Quinkeu has 11 total tackles and a pair of sacks. Temple's 2-0 to the over thus far in the year. BC's coming fresh off a game that got over the number themselves. Give me the Temple Owls plus 16.5 in the over 60. Next ball game, another one not on our big screen, but it is going to be Cincinnati versus Indiana, 12 p.m. Eastern start time. Cincy's minus 3, totals 50.5. The Bearcats are in the top 10 in the country in offensive yards per play. Desmond Ritter's completing over 72% of his passes, and he's thrown for 6 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Jerome Ford, the running back, he scored 4 times on the ground himself, and averages nearly 8 yards a carry. And of course, defensively, the Bearcats are allowing only 129 yards passing a game. They're taking on a Hoosiers team who's averaging only 157 yards a game passing themselves. Michael Penix, kind of a shell of himself. He's completing a dismal 53% of his passes. Penix has also thrown for just 2 touchdown passes along with 3 interceptions. Give me the Bearcats of Cincinnati -3 and the under 50 and a hook. Next ball game, another one not on the big screen. Coastal Carolina versus Buffalo, 12 p.m. Eastern kickoff. The Coastal Carolina Chanticleers are -10, totals 57.5. Coastal's 2-0 thus far in this season, 2-0 against the number as well. They're currently in the top 5 in college football in scoring, top 3 in yards per play. Both Reese White and Shamari Jones are averaging over 7 yards a carry, along with 7 total combined touchdowns between the two of them. Meanwhile, wideout Javon Hiley, he has 12 catches for 255 and 2 scores. Hiley's actually averaging over 21 yards per reception. Meanwhile, defensively, the Chants are in the top 10 in fewest passing yards allowed per game. Defensive tackle Josiah Stewart has 8 total tackles and 3.5 sacks on the year. Now, they're taking on a Buffalo team who scored just 3 points against Nebraska last week. This Buffalo defense also allows over 5.5 yards per play. Now, total-wise, Coastal is 2-0 to the over thus far in the year. They do have the ability to score a ton of points. Give me Coastal Carolina -10 and the over 57.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Michigan State versus Miami, 12 p.m. East. Miami's -7, totals 54.5. The Canes are 0-2 against the spread, 112th in the country in scoring. The Canes are throwing for less than 190 yards a game. Meanwhile, defensively, they're giving up over 275 yards passing per contest. They're taking on a Michigan State program who's 2-0 straight up in the year and successfully covered the point spread in both of those victories. The Spartans are rushing for nearly 300 yards a game. Kenneth Walker III, he's touched it 30 times for 321 yards and 5 scores. The running back is averaging nearly 11 yards per carry. And when it comes to the passing game, Jaden Reed has 9 grabs for 245 and a couple of scores himself. Reed is currently averaging over 27 yards a catch. He's the home run hitter. The Spartan defense is holding their opponents to just 17 points a game. When it comes to the number in this one, Sparty's 2-0 to the over through a couple of contests. I'm going to lean toward the Michigan State Spartans +7 and the over 54.5. Next game, Northern Illinois, Michigan, 12 p.m. East. Michigan is -27, totals 54.5. The Wolverines are 2-0 thus far in this season, 2-0 against the number in those victories. Michigan is in the top 5 in the country in rushing, and they're led by Blake Corum, who's rushed for 282 yards and 4 scores. The sophomore running back is averaging over 8 yards a carry. Meanwhile, senior running back Hassan Haskins, he's gained 225 total yards on the ground himself, along with a pair of touchdown runs. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, this Michigan defense allows just 84 yards a game on the ground. They're taking on a Northern Illinois team who gave up 50 points to Wyoming this past week. The Huskies are giving up over 230 yards on the ground themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Michigan Wolverines -27 and the over 54.5. Next ball game, Nebraska, Oklahoma, 12 o'clock East. Oklahoma's -22, total 61.5. The Sooners are in the top 3 in the nation in scoring. They're led by quarterback Spencer Rattler, who's completing 76% of his passes and has thrown 6 TD passes as well. Meanwhile, defensively, the Sooners are in the top 20 in fewest yards allowed per play. Safety Delaren Turner-Yell has 13 total tackles from the secondary. They're taking on a Nebraska club who lost to the likes of Illinois in their season opener. Now, the Huskers have 2 wins on the season, but those came against the likes of Buffalo and Fordham. So I'm going to go ahead and lean toward the Oklahoma Sooners -22 and the under 61.5. Next ball game, New Mexico versus Texas A&M, 12 p.m. Eastern start time. Texas A&M's minus 28, numbers 51. These Aggie defense is allowing just 99 yards passing a game. Leon O'Neal Jr., he's got a pair of interceptions from the secondary, 8 total tackles and a pick 6. Texas A&M, they're allowing just 8 points a game through 2 contests. They're taking on a New Mexico squad who failed to cover the number in their opening 2 ball games. I'm going to lean toward the Aggies minus 28 and the under 51. Next contest, UConn, Army, 12 p.m. East. Army's minus 33.5. That's a huge number. Total's 51 and a hook. Now, the Black Knights are averaging 41 points per contest through 2 games. 2-0 straight up in those contests as well. The Black Knights are rushing for nearly 300 yards a game. Meanwhile, defensively, they're holding their opponents to just 45 yards per contest on the ground. Andre Carter II, he's leading the country with 4.5 sacks already. Meanwhile, cornerback Julian McDuffie, he's got 10 total tackles and a PBU. They're taking on a UConn team who might as well give the program the death penalty. I think they'd probably lose to Cheyney University of Pennsylvania at this point. They lost 49-0 to Purdue, 45-0 to Fresno, and they actually lost by double digits to FCS Holy Cross. UConn's allowing nearly 500 yards a game of total offense. Meanwhile, total-wise, Army's 2-0 to the over and could potentially put this one over the line themselves. Big number, gonna lay it. Give me Army minus 33.5 and the over 51 and a hook. Next game, for some reason, not on our big screen, should be a good one. Virginia Tech, West Virginia, 12 p.m. East. West Virginia's minus 3, totals 50.5. Mountaineers have lost 7 out of their last 10 meetings with the Hokies. Meanwhile, Va Tech is currently 2-0 on the season and successfully covered the number in both of those victories. This Hokie defense, they're allowing just 12 points a game. D-back Jermaine Waller, he's got a dozen tackles on the year, along with a pair of sacks. VT's 2-0 to the under thus far in the year. Give me the Hokies plus 3 and the under 50 and a hook. Next ball game, Western Michigan versus Pitt, 12 p.m. East. Pitt's minus 15, total 60 and a hook. Pitt's in the top 15 in scoring, and they're averaging 338 passing yards a game. Kenny Pickett's completed 70% of his passes, 4 touchdowns. And while Taysir Mack, 7 catches, 134, and he's averaging over 19 yards per catch. Meanwhile, defensively, these guys have defended the rush quite well. Only 89 yards a game they're giving up on the ground. John Patrician has 10 total tackles and a pair of sacks for the Panthers. They're taking on a Western Michigan program who throws for only $182 a game. The Broncos fell victim to Michigan in their season opener, 47-14. Broncos are 2-0 to the under. I also think they're going to have a tough time moving the football. Give me Pitt minus 15, under 60.5. Next ball game. Not on the big screen, but it is Minnesota versus Colorado, 1 p.m. East. Colorado's minus 2, totals 50. The Buffs are throwing for only 95 yards a game. Brendan Lewis, he's completing just 57% of his passes, and he's only thrown for just 1 touchdown. Colorado's leading receiver has just 37 total receiving yards through 2 games. They're taking on a Minnesota club who's in the top 5 in the nation in offensive time of possession. And despite the loss of Mo Ibrahim in the season opener, the Gophers are still gaining nearly 200 yards a game on the ground. Now, the Gophers are 2-0 to the over thus far in the year. Give me Minnesota plus 2 in the over 50. Next matchup, Nevada, Kansas State, 205 East. Nevada's minus 2.5, totals 49. Nevada's 2-0 on the year, and they successfully covered the point spread in both of those victories. The Wolfpack's also in the top 10 in the country in passing. Carson Strong's completing over 68% of his passes for nearly 700 yards already and 6 touchdowns. Now, they're taking on a Kansas State team who's going to have to go to work without their starting quarterback, and they're actually going to have to go to work here with Will Howard. He's just 8 of 17 on the season for 76 yards and an interception. And as a matter of fact, Howard finished last season completing only 53% of his passes for 8 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. He's going to be a big problem for Kansas State backers. Give me the Nevada Wolfpack -2.5 and the under 49. Next matchup, Purdue, Notre Dame, 2:30 Eastern start time. Notre Dame, -7, total 58.5. The Irish failed to cover the point spread in both of their ball games this year. They're also giving up 34 points a game and nearly 200 yards on the ground. They're taking on a Purdue team who's scoring 40 points per contest and throwing for nearly 350 yards a game. Jack Plummer is completing 74% of his passes, along with 6 touchdown throws. His favorite targets, David Bell, 14 grabs, 255, 3 scores. Bell's averaging nearly 18.5 yards per reception. Meanwhile, defensively, the Boilermakers are giving up just 10 points a game and ranking the top 10 in defensive time of possession. Linebacker Jalen Graham, 7 total tackles, a sack, and 3 PBUs. And when it comes to the total on this one, the Irish have gone 2-0 to the over in both of their contests this year. Give me Purdue +7 in the over 58.5. Next matchup, Bama, Florida, 3:30 p.m. East. The Crimson Tide's -15.5, numbers 57 and a hook. Bama is in the top 15 in scoring. Bryce Young's completing 71% of his passes, along with 7 TDs. Meanwhile, defensively, the Crimson Tide's got 4 interceptions. They're taking on a Florida club who's 0-2 against the spread. The Gators have also lost 8 out of their last 10 meetings with Bama and failed to cover 7 times during that span. Now, scoring-wise, 7 out of these teams' last 10 meetings got over the line. Give me the Alabama Crimson Tide -15.5 and the over 57 and a hook. Next ball game, it is going to be Baylor versus Kansas, 3:30 p.m. East. Baylor's -17, totals 49 and a hook. The Baylor Bears are 2-0 and rank in the top 10 in scoring. Tristan Ebner's rushed for 245 yards and averages over 8 yards a carry. Meanwhile, Abram Smith has rushed for 244 along with 4 scores on the ground. Meanwhile, defensively, Baylor's holding their opponents to just 138 yards passing a game. They're taking on a terrible Kansas program who's lost 12 straight conference games, and they also dropped their last 10 straight to Baylor. And out of those 10 losses, the Jayhawks successfully covered the point spread just 1 time. Give me Baylor -17 in the over 49.5. Next ball game, Florida State versus Wake Forest, 3:30 p.m. Eastern start time. Wake Forest is -7, total 61.5. The Demon Deacons failed to cover against the likes of Norfolk and ODU, Old Dominion. They're taking on a Florida State team who's really talented athletically, and I just think they got caught sleeping against Jacksonville State last week. They're really good athletically. The Noles are still in the top 25 in the country in rushing, and they're led by Jashawn Corbin, who's got 253 yards on the ground along with a couple of scores. Now, the running back is currently averaging nearly 8.5 yards a carry. Meanwhile, defensively, this guy has been crazy. Jermaine Johnson, he's been absolutely dominant with 4 sacks and 18 total tackles. Now, scoring-wise, 7 out of Florida State's last 10 meetings with Wake Forest did stay under the line. And speaking of the Deacons, they're 2-0 to the under thus far in the season themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Florida State Seminoles +7, keeping this one close, in the under 61.5. Next ball game, it is going to be Georgia Tech versus Clemson, 3:30 p.m. East. Clemson's -28.5, totals 51. The Tigers are 0-2 against the spread thus far in the year. They rank 100th in the country in rushing. They're taking on a Georgia Tech squad who's allowing just 123 yards a game passing. Ayinde Ealy is leading the club with 21 total tackles. When it comes to the number, Clemson's currently 2-0 to the under thus far in the season. Give me Georgia Tech plus 28.5 in the under 51. Next ball game, Kent State versus Iowa, 3:30 p.m. Eastern start time. The Iowa Hawkeyes are minus 22.5, totals 54 and a hook. The Hawkeyes are giving up just 11 points a game and holding their opponents to under 85 yards per carry on the ground. Meanwhile, this Hawkeye defense has 6 interceptions already. Linebacker Seth Benson has one of those interceptions, along with 15 total tackles. They're taking on a Kent State program who's going to live and die by the run, and that's certainly a tough task going up against Iowa. And if the Golden Flashes do need to go to the air, quarterback Dustin Crum, he's completing just 55% of his passes, along with only 1 touchdown and a pair of interceptions. Now, total-wise, both schools are 2-0 to the under thus far in the year. Give me Iowa, minus 22.5, and the under 54 and a hook. Next ball game, SMU versus La Tech, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The SMU Mustangs are minus 14, total 65.5. SMU's averaging 46 points a game, along with over 7.4 yards per play. Tanner Mordecai, he's completing 71% of his passes for 629 yards and 11 scores. Meanwhile, safety Isaiah Wacobia has a pair of interceptions along with 10 tackles. They're taking on a La Tech team who allows 39 points a game and over 430 yards a game passing. Give me SMU minus 14 and the over 65.5. Next matchup. It is going to be Tulsa versus Ohio State, 3:30 p.m. East. Ohio State's minus 27, total 61. Buckeyes 0-2 against the number, giving up 33 points a game and over 235 on the ground. They're taking on a Tulsa club who nearly beat Oklahoma State this past weekend, but they did do a nice job covering the point spread in that game. The Golden Hurricanes allowing just 114 yards per contest on the ground, and they're led by safety Kendarin Ray, who has 17 total tackles. Give me Tulsa plus 27 and the over 61. Next matchup, USC versus Washington State, 3:30 p.m. East. USC's minus 9, total 62.5. The Trojans gave up 42 to Stanford this past Saturday. They also have an absurd amount of guys who are banged up right now. I think they just fired their coach. They're taking on a Wazoo team who's scoring 34 a game and gaining over 6.5 yards per play. Meanwhile, defensively, Jahad Woods, he's leading the club with 18 total tackles. Give me Wazoo plus 9 and the over 62.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Colorado State Toledo, 4 p.m. East. Toledo's minus 14.5, totals 58. And as bad as Colorado State's been this season, this is an incredibly big number. Tight end Trey McBride, 21 catches, 230 yards for the Rams. Meanwhile, defensively, defensive back Tywan Francis, he's leading the squad with 20 total tackles and a forced fumble. I think the Rams should be able to keep this one close on the road. Give me Colorado State plus 14.5 and the over 58. Next game, Georgia Southern, Arkansas, 4 p.m. Eastern start time. Arkansas is minus 23.5, totals 52. The Razorbacks are 2-0 straight up, 2-0 against the spread. Arkansas is in the top 10 in the country in rushing, and they average nearly 300 yards on the ground a game. They're taking on a Georgia Southern squad who failed to cover the number in both of their contests this season. The Eagles are throwing for just 126 yards a game. Now, total-wise, the Razorbacks are 2-0 to the over for the year. I'm going to lean toward Arkansas minus 23.5 and the over 52. Next matchup, Mississippi State, Memphis, 4 p.m. East. Mississippi State's minus 3, totals 64. But despite being 2-0, the Bulldogs of Mississippi State, they're rushing for just 43 yards a game. They're taking on a Memphis club who holds their opponents to under 100 yards rushing a game themselves. Meanwhile, offensively, running back Brandon Thomas has rushed it 34 times for 338 yards and 3 scores. The freshman is averaging over 9.5 yards a carry. Meanwhile, wideout Calvin Austin III, he's got 286 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns himself. The senior wideout is averaging almost 24 yards a catch. Give me Memphis +3 in the over 64. Next matchup, not on our big screen, Northwestern versus Duke, 4 o'clock East. Northwestern's -3, totals 50. Wildcats are in the top 20 in defensive time of possession. They're holding their opponents to under $165 passing a game. Chris Bergen is leading the squad with 18 tackles. The Cats are taking on a Duke squad who lost to Charlotte in their season opener. The Blue Devils have lost 7 out of their last 10 meetings with Northwestern, and they're 128th in the country in defensive time of possession. Total-wise, not expecting a track meet here. Give me Northwestern -3, under 50. Next contest, Arkansas State versus Washington, 4:15 Eastern kickoff. Washington -17, total 58.5. The Huskies are 0-2, and they failed to cover in both of those games. Washington, they're 129th in the nation in scoring, 127th in rushing. They're being held to just 57 yards a game on the ground. They're taking on an Arkansas State team who just put up 50 against Memphis in a real nice cover this past Saturday. As a matter of fact, the Red Wolves are in the top 3 in the nation in passing yards per game. Jeff Foreman's got 13 grabs for 253 and a touchdown. Meanwhile, Tavalance Hunt and Corey Rucker, they each have over 200 yards receiving as well. Rucker's got 4 touchdown catches on the year as well. Give me Arkansas State +17 and the over 58.5. Next ball game, it is going to be ECU versus Marshall, 6 o'clock East. Marshall's -9.5, total 55 and a hook. Thundering Herds, top 3 in the nation in passing, and they're led by Grant Wells, who's completing over 70% of his passes for 680. Talik Keaton and Corey Gamage, they have each have over 150 yards receiving apiece. Meanwhile, defensively, the Herds giving up just 83 yards passing through the air. East Carolina, on the other side, they're 0-2 and failed to cover in both of those losses. The Pirates are 113th in the nation in scoring. And when it comes to the scoring in this one, 6 out of these teams' last 10 meetings got over the line. Marshall is currently 2-0 to the over on the season as well. Give me Marshall -9.5 in the over 55 and a hook. Next ball game, Old Dominion versus Liberty, 7 p.m. East. Liberty's -26.5, totals 54. The Flames are in the top 10 in fewest points allowed, and they give up just 53 yards a game on the ground. Linebacker Story Jackson leads the club with 16 tackles and 1.5 sacks. Give me Liberty -26.5 in the over 54. Next matchup, it is going to be Florida International, Texas Tech, 7 p.m. East. Texas Tech is -21, numbers 54. The Red Raiders do have a tendency to take their opponents lightly. They're also throwing for just 197 a game. Meanwhile, FIU on the other side, Florida International, they're holding their opponents to just 180 yards passing a game. Defensive back Richard Dames leads the team with 13 total tackles. Meanwhile, linebacker Daniel Jackson has double-digit tackles and a pair of sacks himself. Give me FIU +21 in the under 54. Next contest, South Carolina, Georgia, 7 p.m. Eastern start time. The Georgia Bulldogs are -31, totals 48 and a hook. Now, the Bulldogs have a handful of guys on the injury report, and they struggled offensively versus Clemson. South Carolina, on the other side, they're in the top 3 in the country in fewest yards allowed per play. This Gamecocks defense has 4 interceptions already and a pair of pick sixes. Linebacker Brad Johnson also leads the club with 12 tackles and a pair of sacks. When it comes to the total in this one, 7 out of these teams' last 10 meetings did get over the number. Give me South Carolina +31 in the over 48 and a hook. Next contest, Utah versus San Diego State, 7 o'clock East. Utah is -7.5, totals 45. The Utes are 0-2 against the number. And they rank 105th in defensive time of possession. They're taking on a San Diego State team who rushes for 260 a game and averages over 6.1 yards per play. Greg Bell's touched it 38 times for 286 and a pair of scores. The running back is averaging 7.5 yards a carry. Give me San Diego State plus 7.5 and the over 45. Next game, Auburn, Penn State, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Penn State's -6, totals 52.5. Now, I think whoever's catching points in this one covers the number. Should be a really tight game. I like Penn State to win it, but I think Auburn covers here. Give me Auburn +6 and the under 52.5. Next matchup, Central Michigan versus LSU, 7:30 Eastern start time. LSU's -20, total 60.5. Tigers failed to cover against the likes of UCLA and McNeese. LSU's also got themselves a fairly large list of guys on the injury report. The Tigers have really failed to establish a run game this year. They're 117th in Division I in rush yards per game. They're taking on a Central Michigan squad who successfully covered the point spread in both of their contests. Their defense is also in the top 15 in the country in fewest pass yards allowed per game. Troy Brown's leading the team in tackles with a dozen of them. When it comes to the number in this one, the Chippewas are 2-0 to the under thus far in the season. LSU's game with McNeese fell about 25 points below the line last week themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Central Michigan Chippewas +20, keeping this one close, and the under 60 and a hook. Next matchup, Utah State versus Air Force, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Air Force Falcons are -8.5, totals 51 and a hook. Now, the Falcons failed to cover the number against the Lafayette Leopards in their opening contest of 2021. Lafayette from Easton, Pennsylvania. Bet a lot of you guys out there have no idea what that is or where it is. And of course, the Falcons never pass the ball. They're throwing for just 49 yards a game. They're taking on a 2-0 Utah State program who successfully covered the number in both of their ball games. The Aggies have held their opponents to just 107 yards rushing a game. Meanwhile, offensively, wide receiver Devin Tompkins has caught 16 balls for 266 yards and a pair of scores. And when it comes to the total in this one, the Aggies saw their season opener with Washington State fall under the number. Meanwhile, Air Force is 2-0 to the under on the season themselves. Give me the Utah State Aggies +8.5 and the under 51 and a hook. Next matchup. For some reason, somehow, not on our big screen, but it is going to be Virginia versus UNC. 7:30 p.m. Eastern kickoff. North Carolina's -9, total 64.5. UNC's 102nd in the country in defensive time of possession. And oddly enough, the Tar Heels have gotten the W in just 4 out of their last 13 September games. They're taking on a Virginia squad who's 2-0 straight up, and they successfully covered the point spread in both of those ball games. The Cavaliers are in the top 10 in the country in yards per play, and they're throwing for over 380 a game. Brennan Armstrong's completing 72% of his passes, along with 7 touchdowns. And he certainly likes to spread it around. He's already got 5 weapons with over 105 yards receiving. Meanwhile, defensively, UVA is in the top 5 in fewest points allowed, top 25 in fewest passing yards allowed as well. Total-wise, the Cavaliers are 2-0 to the under thus far for the season. Meanwhile, the Tar Heels saw their season opener with Virginia Tech stay under the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Virginia Cavaliers +9 in the under 64.5. Next ball game, it is going to be Rice versus Texas, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Texas, the Longhorns, they're -26, totals 52.5. I'd look for a little bounce back action here after a tough loss to Arkansas. Texas is taking on a Rice program who got shellacked by Houston this past Saturday. And they also find themselves 0-2 against the number on the season. Now, the Owls are averaging just 12 points a game and 103 yards a game rushing. Their quarterbacks are also completing just 48% of their passes, and they've thrown 6 interceptions already. Now, total-wise, the Owls are 2-0 to the over. Meanwhile, Texas saw their contest with Arkansas get over the line as well. Give me the Texas Longhorns minus 26 and the over 52.5. Next matchup, Stanford, Vanderbilt, 8 o'clock East. Stanford Cardinal, they're minus 11, totals 49. Stanford's coming off a nice 14-point victory over USC. This Cardinal defense is holding their opponents to just 183 yards passing. Cornerback Q Blue Kelly, he's got a pair of interceptions, a pick six, 3 PBUs, and 9 total tackles from the secondary, and of course, a great name. Vandy on the other side lost their opener to East Tennessee State. They rank 114th in rushing. Give me the Stanford Cardinal minus 11 and the under 49. Next matchup, Tulane versus Ole Miss, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. The Ole Miss Rebels are minus 14, total 74. Ole Miss is 108th in defensive time of possession. They're taking on a Tulane squad who's in the top 3 in scoring, and they successfully covered the number in both of those contests this year. Quarterback Michael Pratt has 7 total touchdowns thus far in the season. Meanwhile, offensively, Michael Pratt has over 7 total touchdowns this season, passing and rushing. The Green Waves holding their opponents to just 80 yards a game rushing defensively. They're 2-0 to the over. Ole Miss saw their contest with Austin Peay get over the line. Give me Tulane plus 14 in the over 74. Next game, Oklahoma State versus Boise, 9 o'clock Eastern start time. Boise State's minus 4.5, totals 57. And as good as they're passing the ball, the Boise State Broncos are rushing for just 70 yards a game. They're also 119th in the country in offensive time of possession. They're taking on a 2-0 Oklahoma State team who allows only 19 points per contest and just 112 yards a game rushing. Malcolm Rodriguez has a staggering 28 tackles already for the Cowboys. Safety Colby Harvell-Peel has 14 tackles himself along with a PBU. Oklahoma State plus 4.5, under 57 is the pick. Next game, Arizona State BYU, 10:15 Eastern Standard Time. Arizona State's minus 3.5, totals 51 and a hook. The Sun Devils failed to cover in their opening 2 games this season. They're also throwing for just 187 yards. Arizona State's got a slew of guys on the injury report as well. They're taking on a gritty 2-0 BYU team who allows just 16 points a game. And they're led by Keenan Pili, who's got 24 total tackles and 1.5 sacks on the year. Now, total-wise, the Cougs are 2-0 to the under. Arizona State's 2-0 to the under themselves. Give me BYU plus 3.5 and the under 51 and a hook. Next matchup, Fresno, UCLA, 10:45 East. The UCLA Bruins are minus 11.5, total 61. The Bruins are in the top 25 in scoring, and they're rushing for over 225 a game. Zach Charbonnet has touched it 17 times for 224 and 4 scores. The running back's averaging an absurd 13.1 yards per carry. UCLA is currently 2-0 straight up, and they successfully covered the number in both of those victories. They're taking on a Fresno State team who's 2-1 on the year, but those 2 victories came against the likes of UConn and Cal Poly. The Fresno State Bulldogs are 87th in the country in rushing yards. When it comes to the number in this one, 2 out of the Bulldogs' 3 games this season fell under the line. Meanwhile, UCLA saw their opener with Hawai'i stay 13 points below the posted total themselves. I'm going to lean toward the UCLA Bruins minus 11.5 and the under 61. And with that, guys, we're going to jump into our next and final matchup. It is going to be San Jose State versus Hawai'i, 12:30 a.m. Eastern start time. Technically, it's on Sunday. The San Jose State Spartans are minus 7, totals 59.5. The Spartans are coming off a tough 30-7 loss to USC in their last ball game. The Spartans are 108th in the country in rushing and 113th in offensive time of possession. They're taking on a Hawai'i club who's very tough to beat on the island. Their lone victory this season did come at the complex, and the Warriors are currently in the top 25 in pass yards. Nick Martiner's got 13 catches for 242 and a couple of scores. Meanwhile, Calvin Turner's got 17 grabs out of the backfield himself for 238 yards. Now, total-wise, the Rainbow Warriors are 2-0 to the over. They also went 4-2 to the over in their last 6 meetings with San Jose State. I'm going to lean toward the Hawai'i Rainbow Warriors +7. And the over 59.5. And with that, guys, now it's time for our quick pick recap. Powered to you by my website at brockpage.com. And if you want to see which one of these free YouTube picks I'm actually betting on personally, there's only one way to do that, and that's to get a membership on that website. I like the Ohio Bobcats +20 under 54.5. UCF -7 under 69 and a hook. Maryland -7 under 59.5. Temple +16.5 over 60 points. Cincinnati -3 under 50.5. Coastal Carolina -10 over 57 and a hook. Michigan State +7 over 54.5. I also like Michigan, the Wolverines, covering the spread in that ball game. And I forget what I picked on the total. Give me Oklahoma -22 under 61.5. Texas A&M -28 under 51. Army -33.5 over 51 and a hook. Virginia Tech +3 under 50.5. Pitt Panthers -15 under 60 and a hook. Minnesota +2 over 50 points. Nevada -2.5 under 49. Purdue +7 over 58.5. Alabama -15 and a hook over 57.5 points. Baylor -17 over 49 and a hook. Florida State +7 under 61.5. Georgia Tech +28 and a hook under 51. Iowa -22.5 under 54.5 points. SMU -14 over 65 and a hook. Tulsa +27 over 61. Washington State +9 over 62.5 points. Colorado State +14.5 over 58 points. Arkansas -23.5 over 52. Memphis +3 over 64. Northwestern -3 under 50 points. Arkansas State +17 over 58.5. Marshall -9.5 over 55 and a hook. Liberty Flames -26.5 over 54. Florida International +21 under 54. South Carolina Gamecocks +31 over 48.5. San Diego State +7.5 over 45. Auburn +6 under 52 and a hook. Central Michigan +20 under 60.5. Utah State +8.5 under 51 and a hook. Virginia Cavaliers +9 under 64.5. I'm also leaning toward the Texas Longhorns -26 over 52 and a hook. I also like Stanford -11 under 49. Tulane +14 over 74. Oklahoma State +4.5 under 57. I'm also leaning toward BYU +3.5 under 51 and a hook. I also like UCLA -11.5 under 61. Before I give you my next and final free pick for the video, one final reminder that if you want to see which one of these free YouTube picks that I'm actually betting on personally, there's still only one way to do that, and that's to sign up for a membership on my website at brockpage.com. I'm going to lean toward the Hawai'i Rainbow Warriors +7 and the over 59.5. And with that, guys, now it's time for our shout out of the day, and that's going to come from our YouTube platform. And that shout out of the day, that's going to go to David Bonilla, who said last week, "Brock, I always like your quick hits of pertinent facts." Well, David, I certainly appreciate that. And Bonilla, I always think of Bobby Bonilla. He's still getting paid, $1 million a year by the New York Mets. And I think that continues for like another 15 years or something. Or did that expire? I don't know. But anyway, David Bonilla, certainly appreciate you in the comments section. With that, guys, that's going to do it for me. Don't forget to check me out on brockpage.com. If you guys do end up getting a membership here today on that website, just keep in mind, You're going to get billed the day you sign up and then the first of every month following that. So if you do end up getting a membership here today, you're going to get access to that content all the way through the end of September. I always tell folks the earlier in the month you sign up, the better. But most importantly, guys, got to thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. I really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. And with that said, guys, happy Tuesday to you. Best of luck to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at brockpage.com.